Hey guys, this is Alex with Armadillo Armament. Today, we're going to be discussing one of my favorite combat handguns ever created, the Sig Sauer P226, and this is the Extreme model. Before we talk about this legendary handgun, I have partnered with Red Pawn Shop. If you use code Armadillo, you will get 5% off your order. For every item in the order, he will both plant a tree and remove 1 pound of junk from the ocean, and it is of armadillos with quad nods, and then of course my channel logo. You're not only saving the planet, you're getting a really cool patch. Now, before we talk about how this gun shoots and feels to shoot and operates today, I want to give you guys a quick history lesson because this firearm deserves it. The 226 was created in the 80s by Sig Sauer. Basically, the military wanted to move from the venerable 1911, my favorite handgun of all time. And many people would say it wasn't a necessary step or a necessary improvement, but the 1911 was showing its age, right? This is a single stack magazine that's commonly going to hold 8 rounds of 45 ACP, and Europeans had double stack weapons like the Browning High Power for quite a while. The military wanted to step up to a double stack magazine with, if my memory serves me correctly, a 15-round requirement. Many pistols were brought into that trial. The most important ones, I would say, are going to be the 226 and the M9 Beretta. Now, the M9 Beretta actually won that contract, or rather just the Beretta during the prototyping, actually won that contract. There is information out there that says that the 226 actually performed better than the Beretta, not by a significant margin. The Beretta is a fantastic handgun, even if I don't own one and I don't love them. I can respect their history and I can respect their capability, but the 226 was actually found to be a more reliable system in their testing. This did go under a different name in the testing, but they found that this was once again the most reliable, and you can find those results online. I recommend you do your own research. That being said, many units still preferred the 226, and the 226 really won the hearts of a lot of different units. Most famously, the Navy SEALs. The 226 was essentially given a new coat of paint that was corrosion resistant and salt resistant. Navy SEALs, they spent a lot of time in the water, and the form of the Mark 25, which I'll put on the screen right now, which you can tell because of course, the finish differences and then the anchor on the handgun. Now, I do think that the military made a good choice going with the Beretta system. Once again, though, in my perfect world, the 226, and in many people's perfect world, the 226 would have won that contract, and this would have been the sidearm of the United States military. Now, the first thing to talk about with the 226 is the ergonomics. If you know anything about me, you know that I love my Glocks. This is missing its X300. It looks naked without it. But I love my Glocks. Glocks are squares. They are bricks with triggers. So you know that I am not a ergonomics snob. I love the 1911, which is probably the most ergonomic firearm ever created, or it's up there. I love how it points. I love how it shoots. But when it comes to my self-defense firearms, I really don't care too much about ergonomics. I think that you should be able to pick up any gun, regardless of really how uncomfortable it is, to a certain limit, and be able to shoot that gun effectively, right? But the 226 is different. First of all, this is the first weapon I ever purchased through an FFL, or my first pistol I purchased through an FFL. So this already has a lot of nostalgia for me and a little bit of bias. But the 226 just fits me so well, and it's very hard to describe. Now, whenever I come back to the 226 and I don't use it for a couple weeks or a couple months, and I go into my gun rack and I unsheath it, the first thing I notice when I'm grabbing the grip is just how well my hand wraps around the grip. The grip of the 226 is fat, right? Especially compared to a 1911, and even compared to a Glock, I would say that it is a pretty fat grip. It's actually wider. but it is extremely well contoured. And the center of your hand kind of has probably a scientific word for it, but a indent. The periphery of your hand is a little bit larger, right? So when I grab the 226, it just perfectly fits in with that swell, and it just locks the gun into my hand. Now, that is also a benefit of the G10 grips. A lot of people don't like these G10 grips and they prefer the E2 grips, or they prefer the different Legion grips or wood grips. The wood grips look fantastic, but these G10 grips on the Extreme 226 just fit so well. I can't imagine ever trading these. Now, this grip angle is a lot more shallow than the Glock, right? Famously, many people don't like Glock grip angles because of how aggressive they are, and that can help with recoil. But a 1911 and a 226 have a much more vertical grip angle, which, once again, when I bring this gun up to my eyes are just exactly where the iron sights are. The iron sights are directly in my vision without needing to course correct. And that's with having a lot of time on Glocks that have changed how I point my firearms. The 226 grip angle and the grip are fantastic, and I can't imagine ever changing to like their E2 system. I think this is better. Now, there is a little bit of front strap checkering in the form of these horizontal lines, not vertical, but that's a very intelligent move. Think about it. When the gun is recoiling, a vertical line, when my hand, so I'll try to give you guys an example, if it's moving up and down and it's just vertical lines, that's not doing anything. But because these are horizontal and my fingers are, of course, here, I find that it does add that little bit of extra grip that I really prefer. Now, I would like these to be even more aggressive. I love my guns super aggressive, but the TG6 doesn't recoil that much, so it's perfectly fine the way it is. Moving up the firearm, we have the trigger. The trigger is interesting and I love it. Once again, this is my first pistol I really bought. My first pistol was a Glock 43, but that was off of a friend. This is the first pistol I actively went out to purchase after doing all my research and wanting to get a good combat handgun that I could actually EDC. But the trigger. This is a double action, single action gun. So if you don't know what that means, it means that the hammer can obviously be cocked, and that will put the gun in single action mode, where it has a fantastic 2 to 3 pound trigger. And because this is the extreme model, it has their SRT trigger, which has a very nice reset. I'll show you guys what that looks like. Here is the single action trigger pull, and then the reset. So barely 2 to 3 pound pull. That's phenomenal. That is a 2011 level trigger. And if you don't believe me, here is a Gold Cup national match, which is considered to have a phenomenal trigger, and I agree with them. I love my Gold Cup national match trigger. Let's do the beaver tail safety. Here's the trigger pull. Very nice. And reset. That doesn't look that much different than the 226, does it? So here we are in the year 2024. A lot of people prefer their staccatos and 2011s because they have phenomenal triggers. Meanwhile, 30, 40 years ago, before Glocks kind of took over everything, and Glocks were around then, but before Glocks took over everything, the 226 trigger was phenomenal. And the M9 trigger that's worked over is phenomenal. So the trigger on the 226 is great. Now, let's talk about the double action. The double action is about 8 pounds, and it is very smooth. It's not very jumpy, where if you've shot a low quality double action gun, you will see that it's a little bit like stagey, and it doesn't feel nearly as smooth, right? This is a very smooth double action, to the point where I can predictably, or I can predict when it's going to go off, of course, and I can actually stage the trigger, even though it's double action, right? Which a lot of people say that a double action trigger requires a lot of training. I mean, sure, but as long as your firearm fundamentals are there, a double action trigger, especially one that is as smooth as this, really isn't difficult to adjust to. And a small tangent on double action, single action. This is probably my preferred action. Now, once again, I love Glocks. I love how reliable they are, how nice I shoot them, how customizable they are. But they are a striker fired design, and I am a hammer fired guy. I love my hammer fired guns, and I love my single action guns like the 1911. However, if Glocks made a double action, single action gun, I would buy it. I love the peace of mind of when I am holstering this. I can drop it, of course, in a double action, and I know that Glocks aren't going to go off in your pants because of their internal safeties and everything and their trigger safety, but I know that it's going to require a force of God to pull that trigger inside of my pants and that I am protected, right? As well as I really like that once it goes into single action mode, I then have a almost like an AR-15 trigger is what I would compare this to. Maybe not quite as nice, but it's just a very, very, very nice single stage trigger. Um, it's just great. Now let's talk about the other controls because this is one of my other favorite things about the 226. We have the slide release and the decocker. The decocker is pretty rudimentary. It's pretty simple. When you push down on this lever right here, it is going to decock the hammer. That's just making it so it's safe to like reholster your weapon and drop it and everything, right? But this right here, this slide stop is absolutely phenomenal on the original 226s and most 226s. The only one that doesn't have a slide stop that's nice is the Legion. The Legion's is actually much more subdued, and I don't prefer that. Now, a benefit of the Legion, and I know this isn't a Legion, so I shouldn't even be talking about it, but a benefit of the Legion is it's very low profile, so people find it doesn't depress when they're shooting and cause the gun to not lock back. But I love this slide stop and where it's positioned, and I'm going to show you why. When you are reloading the gun, obviously the gun is at slide lock. Now you will see that my thumb perfectly rests on that, and it feels very nice. It's similar to a Glock, but it stands much further out, right? So I am going to be using real ammunition here. Don't worry, I'm not going to ND, and I'll clear it right after. But when I load this magazine in, what you do is you hold your thumb on this slide stop. And when you force the magazine in, it's essentially going to push your thumb down basically because of the inertia and just the muscle you're putting into it. And it's going to kind of really speed reload the gun without you needing to hit the controls like intentionally, if that makes sense. A lot of guns actually have this capability. Glocks, if you slam them home, will actually send the slide home. Same with like P10Cs. But the 226 just feels great. So I'm going to demonstrate it for you right now. Just a really quick, fluid motion that reloads the gun. I'm going to decock it, and now I'm going to eject that round because we still have a firearm to review. So, and by the way, I am safe now, right? The 226 ergonomics are just top tier, guys. I don't know how else to say it. This doesn't have front slide serrations, but I don't find that to be an issue. I'm easily able to do my press checking. The takedown lever is fine. There's nothing else to say other than the 226 fits my hand like a glove and is one of the most ergonomic firearms I've ever used. So how is it to shoot the 226? Well, like I mentioned, the ergonomics really help the gun in every single way, and that includes shooting. The G10 grips are nice and grippy. The texturing up here allows me to have extra traction when I am shooting the weapon. And of course, this is a fully metal gun, right? This is not a steel frame, a super heavy gun, but the aluminum frame on the 226 does absorb a little bit of recoil, especially with a hefty X300 at the front that I just added for you guys. This is actually how I carried the gun with a extreme slide for a while. I'll put pictures right here. The gun got painted. I did a lot of really cool things to that gun, and a Delta Point Pro, which makes a really great package of a firearm if you're not willing to move to a more modern system like, let's say, this Glock. But anyway, the shooting experience on the SIG is a little bit hard to articulate. It shoots phenomenally, and you'll be able to see in this video right here that I am able to shoot this with a pretty good cadence of fire, right? The 226 does have a higher bore axis than many other guns. Once again, the Glock has a very nice low bore axis. This is a Glock 45. The 226 has a much higher bore axis. The barrel is all the way up here above your hand, right? That's like an inch. So you would think that the gun would shoot very poorly, but that's just not the case. Yes, it does have a little bit of muzzle flip, more muzzle flip than something like my Glocks or a 2011, but because the gun is engineered the way it is and the ergonomics of the firearm, and I guess really everything that you do to a 226 with the X300, with the phenomenal trigger, um, it just makes it so it's really one of the most accurate guns that I shoot. Whenever I come back to the 226, even though I'm so acclimated to red dots, and I love red dots, you should put them on every single gun. This gun only has iron sights, and I find that I am able to, at 10 or 15 yards, just make a clover-sized hole in the center of the target because of that phenomenal trigger, because of the great sights that come on the gun, and just because of how great the gun feels and feels to shoot. Now, once again, this is slower than a CZ SP01 or a CZ Shadow 2 or a 2011 because of that bore axis. But at the end of the day, guys, we're shooting 9mm, and 9mm really doesn't have too much recoil. So as long as your shooting fundamentals are set and you are gripping the gun tightly and you are presenting the gun and utilizing the leverage in your arms and your stance and everything correctly, the gun doesn't have too much recoil. And I've gotten into a lot of arguments with friends and people about this online. They say, oh, I would never get a 226 because of that bore axis. It ruins the gun. Those people clearly haven't shot it. And if you shot the 226, you would know just how accurate it is and how phenomenal it feels to shoot even under fast strings of fire. So I can't recommend the 226 enough. In a duty capacity when it comes to shooting, a self-defense capacity, the gun is not going to limit you. And honestly, I've seen a lot of people compete with the X5s and Legion series. I could genuinely see this as a competition gun, assuming you put a red dot and everything on it, which, once again, I think is necessary. All right, reliability. I don't need to tell you that the 226 is one of the most combat-proven guns ever created. I consider this on par as reliable, maybe even more reliable than any other gun or any other handgun on the planet. The guns that come to mind are the Glock, the 226, and the USP. Those are my three guns that I would take to hell and back, and I would trust my life to no matter what. There are other guns that are perfectly reliable, but really none that have been as combat tested as those three, especially the USP, which I'll be making another video on at some point. But this gun has seen, I'm just guessing, 5,000 rounds. Definitely not less than 5,000, but 5,000 or more. And during that time, I have only had a handful of malfunctions. Funny enough, for the longest time since I owned the gun, I never had a malfunction for the first probably 2,000 rounds. And then when I was playing around with different slides and putting a red dot on it and everything, and I used the extreme slide and a silencer co-barrel, I went to the range and the first round out of my silencer co-barrel caused a failure to feed. That was my first malfunction, or a failure to eject. That was the first malfunction I ever had on the gun. And I remember I was kind of newer to guns at that point, and I thought that was a huge deal, when in reality, the barrel just kind of needed to be broken in. And I didn't have a single malfunction after that until very recently. I was at the range, and you will see videos on my channel of my friends shooting a couple guns. I'll put the video right here. And funny enough, my friend and I were discussing the reliability of his double stack 45 FN and my 226. And I said, it was something along the lines of, oh man, guns just aren't built the same way they were back then. My 226 is, I've barely ever seen anything wrong with it. It just chews everything. And during that range trip, I had multiple malfunctions. I was using an aftermarket 20 round mag, and to be fair, this gun had not been cleaned in probably 5,000 rounds. Maybe a little bit of oil, because, squirt in a little bit of oil, a little bit of lube. But it was also 0 degrees out, and I think the gun just choked up because of how cold it was. But I don't take that as a discredit for the 226. This gun is utterly reliable. I have had better reliability with this than I have with Glocks. And my Glocks are extremely reliable. I trust my life to these, but the 226, even more so. Maybe I got the perfect one. And maybe I just got lucky and I've been using good ammo. But once again, the 226 is utterly reliable. If you need to use this for self-defense or a duty capacity and you are using high quality ammunition like self-defense ammo, which is going to have a better primer, a better loading, better bullet geometry, everything, the 226 will definitely treat you well. You don't need to worry about this thing malfunctioning in a fight as long as you take care of it. All right. The 226, it's reliable, guys. Now, the last thing we need to talk about with 226 is just the aesthetics, right? You guys know that I love my Glocks. I think I'm the only person on the planet that thinks that Glocks actually look cool. Not this. This needs the X300 to look cool. I like the boxy nature of the Glock, but guns really aren't built the same way, or they're not designed the same way they were 50 years ago and 100 years ago. The 1911 is a obvious example of just a timeless design that everyone loves, right? The 226 was one of the last firearms, or the last handguns in the past 50 years where I have said, that's a good looking gun. And I'm intentionally showing you guys the ugly side of the 226, right? The 226 has two sides. First of all, it has the right side, which looks decently cool, kind of boxy. It just kind of looks generic. But for some reason, the right side of the gun, or the left side of the gun rather, just looks phenomenal. I don't know what it is, but SIG really made a attractive looking handgun, a aggressive and professional looking handgun. And this is something I talked about with my USP review, and I will talk about again in the future, but it's not extremely important the way a gun looks to me, but if a gun can elicit a emotional response, and if it can make me say, damn, that's a good looking gun, then I'm probably going to pick it up more, and I'm probably going to shoot it more, and I'm probably going to like it more. That's why a lot of people love the 1911 guys. It's just such a timeless design, and the 226 falls into that camp of just a very professional and nice looking firearm. Partnered with a X300, I think this gun looks great. I've seen pictures online of people putting RMRs and like Acros and everything on top and like on their Legion models and their X5s. I'll put some pictures on right now. Those guns look great, and I would love to get a MOS type slide, so a slide that can accept an optic, and put an RMR on this and really make a modern day 226. And I'd love for SIG to continue to work on the 226 platform, which they definitely are. They're not dropping it anytime soon. It is, when I think of SIG Sauer, I think of the 226. And I think of the MCX too, but mostly the 226 as their crown accomplishment. So I would love for SIG to continue working on this gun, continue evolving it into the future. And once again, it's just a attractive looking gun, and SIG really did their homework. Their engineers they were cooking with something different in that kitchen when they were making the 226, and it worked out because this gun was used all over the world. And to this day, it's one of the most recognizable firearms on the planet. There's a reason you see this in so many movies and TV shows and video games today. So, SIG engineers, you guys did a great job. This is a beautiful looking gun. So, the SIG Sauer 226. It's not the most modern firearm we've had on this channel. Does it have the same capacity as a similar sized Glock? No. It only holds 15 rounds. It could hold more. Does it have the lowest bore axis like a CZ? No, it doesn't. So it's going to have a little bit more recoil. And is it as cheap as the venerable Glock? No, it's not. Glocks are $500. This is $1,000. Maybe even a little bit more or less depending on which model. They can go up to $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 226s. But if you're buying a 226 or an M9 or a 1911, you're doing it because you have a emotional investment in the platform. I bought this because I thought it was attractive. I knew it was utterly reliable, and I really cared about the significance of the gun. There's a reason I own the USP, the 1911, and M45A1. I really like having the different guns that kind of built our nation and many other nations. And the 226 is one of those guns. That being said, if you want to purchase a 226 today, it will serve you well. It is utterly reliable. It is a phenomenal shooter. And if I couldn't own a Glock, any one of my Glocks, my Roland Special, my favorite platform probably on the planet, if I couldn't own a Glock and Glock didn't exist, I'd probably have a 226. It's that phenomenal. Now, I'm going to leave you guys with a shameless quote that whenever the 226 comes up, I always recite to anyone that will listen. And it goes, "What is the greatest combat handgun ever created, and why is it the P226?" Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.